Namaste. Good morning to all our festival attendees from India, and good evening for those of you joining from California or the East Coast, and good afternoon to you, Annapurna ji, who is joining us from Hawaii. It's afternoon there. We are truly grateful for your time today and for your enthusiastic support and participation in this month-long festival of oneness, celebrating the life and works of Jagadguru Adi Shankaracharya. We are now on day 15, session number 1. It's amazing that half the festival is over, and it's been a joy listening to so many thinkers, authors, academicians, and also engineers and management gurus talk about Advaita and Vedanta. We have 2 sessions for those of you joining for the first time. One at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is the current session, and one at 6:30 p.m. IST, which we call as session number 2. All the talks are being recorded and are being made available on the Advaita Academy channel on YouTube as well as on Facebook. So please tell your friends and please join and make this festival a grand success. Today we have the pleasure of Annapurna Sharada ji as our first speaker. She's going to be speaking about Shankara's teachings on qualification. Annapurna ji is the administrative head of the Sarada Ramakrishna Vivekananda Associations, an assistant Dharma teacher and associate editor of Nectar of Non-Dual Truth, Advaita Satyam Amritam, SRV's Journal of Universal Religious and Philosophical Teachings. She was initiated into the Ramakrishna lineage by revered Swami Aseshananda ji, and after his passing has continued her studies with Swami Aseshananda ji's disciple, Babaji Bob Kindler. Babaji Bob Kindler was a speaker. He has been kind enough to present at this festival twice, once live and once via video. And today we are really fortunate to have Annapurna Sharada ji share her inspiring message with all of us. Thank you so much once again. You may start your presentation.
Thank you. We'll begin with prayer. I'm Gurupyo Namaha, Sharada Ramakrishna Vivekananda Namaha. Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha, Brahmaiva Jivaha Sakalam Jagacha, Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksha, Brahmadvitiye Shritayaha Pramanam. It is the sure and certain conclusion of the Vedanta that all existence is Brahman. Living beings, the world, time, space, living in constant realization of this truth is called enlightenment, moksha. Brahman is one without a second, and the revealed scriptures are its sure and certain proof. Jai Shankaracharya. So, I'm here to share about the qualifications that Sri Shankaracharya gives us. I want to back up just a little bit. In the United States, back at the turn of the last century, Swami Vivekananda brought the teachings of Vedanta, and with him, of course, the teachings of Sri Shankaracharya as the commentator of the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita. All of that was woven into his teachings. And then on his second trip to the West, he brought one of his brother monks, Swami Turiyananda. And Swami Turiyananda took up the work in San Francisco. This is like 1900. He took up the work in San Francisco and started the United States' first ashram dedicated to the teachings of Vedanta. And during that time, he took his students through the Vivekachudamani. So that was a very long time ago. And those very fortunate students got a wonderful grounding in the teachings given by Shankara through the Vivekachudamani, which is an absolute handbook for spiritual practice and realization. But now here we are 120 years later, and the times are different. That was a period of time, even in the United States, where mental discipline was more important. Nowadays, there's much more emphasis on materialism and on pleasure. And in this day and age, when we also have in the United States a movement of Advaita that is not tied to the scriptures. So when I think of Sri Shankaracharya and I think about the teachings of qualification, I would like to see this be more inculcated among those who are studying non-duality in the West. So to make sure that I don't get off track here, I'm going to run through a few of the teachings as they appear in the Vivekachudamani. So, who is fit for knowledge? Shankaracharya tells us that we need to be intelligent and that we need to have self-control. We need to have a tranquil mind. And we need to be able to use our intellect to reason in such a way that we can remove doubts. All of these are very, very important, along with along with the turning away from the seeking of pleasure, turning away of sense pleasures. In the United States, and maybe throughout the world generally right now, there is a lack of understanding that there is this bondage that is keeping us from realizing the truth of our nature. In all the great scriptures and darshanas of India, we find that one of the first things they tell us is what is going to be realized if we follow these teachings. And so we are told up front about this state of liberation. This is a liberation that's not freedom from bondage, actually. It's a state ever at hand, as we were discussing just before we got on. It is never the effect of a cause. And yet, this state of realization of absolute freedom, it's not freedom from anything. It's just pure freedom. It's a state of bliss and immortality, of eternity. This is our nature, and the scriptures tell us this right away. Now, why don't we feel this? If Brahman is one without a second, why don't we experience this? And so then we get into the teachings of false superimposition, and that we need discrimination between what's eternal and what's non-eternal. So in giving these teachings here in the West, we have to be very, very careful in how we present them, because most people don't understand that their vision is clouded. And maybe they don't even believe it. They have, in a way that, one of the ways that I think of this is waking up is hard to do here in the United States. Because from the beginning of our lifetimes, we are taught that pleasure is the goal of life, that we are made happy by things that are outside of us. And even parental mantra is to the children, go out there and have fun. So we think that's what we're supposed to do. The world always comes before God for the greater proportion of people. And we think that we are the body. And also in these contemporary times, there's an emphasis on emotionalism, and that it's okay. that we need to express our emotions and give vent to them and engage in that with others. We are taught, actually, that detachment means repression. Swami Sheshananda used to say that it's not freedom to the senses, but freedom from the senses that we want. So these are some of the obstacles and challenges that we have here in the West, or maybe here in the modern world. So now we know that to be fit for knowledge, we need to have intelligence. We need to refine our thinking process. We need to turn away from sensual pleasures. And we also very much need to be sincere. Now, a gauge of this sincerity is, do we have yearning for liberation? Does the idea of our ever perfect, ever free, ever enlightened nature enthrall us? Or is it easier to go watch TV? Is it easier to take pleasure in watching silly things on our cell phones? So we have to be honest. But if we are wanting, if we find that we do want, and maybe we want to want this higher life, this life of great nobility, then we will begin to engage in the 4 qualifications. We will, as Shankaracharya says, we need to have this discrimination. But first, go find a teacher, a qualified teacher. This is another issue that we've had in the West. So we don't know who a teacher is. We don't know what qualities a teacher should have. And I cannot think of a single lecture that my guru, Swami Sheshanandaji, gave that did not include listing Shankaracharya's 4 qualifications of the teacher. So even though we need to talk about the student, let me just go ahead and mention these. So the qualifications of a competent teacher, or even the best of all teachers, is that they need to know the essence of the scriptures, not just the letter of the law. And not only know the essence of the scriptures, be able to transmit it to us. They must live a life that is consonant with what they are teaching. In the West, the idea of philosophy and religion does not go together. The 2 things are kept separate. And philosophy is kept speculative. It's almost like intellectual gymnastics for the mind. You never really hear about people studying philosophy and then living it. But the Indian darshanas, the gift of Mother India, is that philosophy and religion go together, and philosophy must be lived. When we hear these teachings and we admire them, we have to make our lives conform. This is a process for most people. Some people will take to it right away. Others will have to do it gradually, and both are okay. But the point is that we have to make our lives conform to these teachings, to this philosophy. So the qualification of a guru is that their life should match the teachings that they are giving forth. And then the other one, and this is also very, very important, is that a teacher should impart the teachings for no other purpose than the student become realized in their own right. Now, the teacher can point out our obstacles, and the teacher can, there's something called Guru Shakti that imparts some special energy. Just being in the presence of a true teacher will lift the consciousness up, but it's up to the student afterwards, when they leave the presence of the teacher, to keep that up. We call that getting our torch lit by the teacher, and then learning on our own how to keep it lit. So, and we may have to repeat this quite a bit before we get the hang of it and keep our own torch lit. The torch of a balanced and refined mind, a torch of inspiration. So the teacher imparts this knowledge for no other reason than the very compassion that we be free of suffering and realize our own divine nature. And they don't want money for this. A true teacher doesn't want money. They will not charge for the teachings. A true teacher is not seeking fame or gratification of any kind. It is pure compassion by which the teacher gives these teachings out. And then the fourth one, which is highlighted very strongly by Shankaracharya, is that the teacher be a knower of Brahman. They must have a level of realization that truly qualifies them to share. Otherwise, it's simply the blind leading the blind, as is said in the Katha Upanishad. So these are the 4 qualifications of the teacher. So now, back to the qualifications of the student. Because if the student is not sincere, if the student is coming to the teacher just for intellectual curiosity, if the student is trying to solve their worldly problems only, then it's not going to be very fruitful. The student really needs to have the sincerity of wanting to know the truth of their own being. They want to be free. They want the teaching sincerely. So one of the first qualifications, or the first and foundational qualification, and I would say that this is a universal qualification. And when I say universal, I mean not just for Indian darshanas, but I think every religion. We need to have viveka, discrimination between what's eternal and what's non-eternal. And that will cover even the dualistic religions. But here, we put it in a very special way. It's put in a very special way. We need a firm conviction that Brahman is real. That means it doesn't go away, ever. It's ever present in waking, dreaming, deep sleep, in all states, in whether the universe is manifested or unmanifested. That Brahman is ever there. And the world is unreal. And this is a very hard thing. In fact, we joke about this in SRV. You tell people, Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya. The world is real, Brahman is real and the world is false. And immediately people get all upset. Oh no, the world is false. I can't believe this. What happens to all my joys and sorrows? My family's not real. My children are not real, etc., and on they go. Forgetting the very first part, which is Brahman is real. Brahman is real and the essence of everything. So this first part is we need to have discrimination between those two things. Now, a great portion of the first part of the Vivekachudamani is actually given to how we do this discrimination. And I'm sure Sri Shankara would have agreed with Lord Vashishta, who said, trying to learn the scriptures, and trying to learn the Dharma without a teacher is like trying to grow crops only at night. It's not going to be efficient or successful. So Shankaracharya tells us that the first thing we need is viveka, but we need to go find ourselves a competent teacher. And then that teacher will go ahead and start instructing us in different methods, like how we have 3 bodies, the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body, and how all of these are not the self, or the 5 koshas, the Annamaya kosha, the physical sheath, the energy sheath, the mental sheath, the intellectual sheath, and the sheath of bliss, otherwise called ego, and even the sheath of ignorance, because that's the first thing that covers over the presence of our divine nature that's infinite. So the teacher will guide us through this, and if we are studying the scriptures like Vivekachudamani and others that teach these different methods, the teacher helps us refine them. So this relationship with the teacher is very important. The next one is vairagya, which is renunciation. And we can also say detachment. Now that we have convinced ourselves by listening to the teachings of what is eternal and what is not, and learning how to do this discrimination, this neti process, that, you know, the self is not the body, the self is not the energy, the self is not the mind, etc. It's not the senses or the five elements. As we do this contemplation deeply in our meditations and bring it into our waking life as we go through the day, then we begin to truly convince ourselves that all of the world is ephemeral, that it's not lasting. And so we begin to turn away. It's like, you know, we go from base pleasures to better pleasures to intellectual pleasures, and finally we want spiritual enlightenment. So we begin to withdraw from seeking pleasure in the external and find it within. And this is a little by little process, especially for householders. So, but we know it's the ideal and we will engage in it. Then the next one, the next of the 4 qualifications is called the Satsampati, which is the 6 treasures or 6 jewels. And these are a beautiful and very, very important list. And I'm going to jump ahead of those for just a second and go to the last one, which is Mumukshutvam. This is the longing, the yearning for liberation. Some of the commentators on these 6, these treasures, like I should list those, you know, tranquility and sense control, self-withdrawal, forbearance, constant concentration on the reality, on Brahman, and faith in the words of the revealed scriptures, the Shruti, and faith in the words of the teacher. All of these things need to be yoked to the qualification, yoked to mumukshutvam, the longing for liberation. Because if we're only seeking to gain those in order to have a little relative peace, to be able to abide in sattva, right, balance, we're going to lose it. But if we have this ultimate aim of liberation in mind as we go about it, then these will reach fruition. So backing up now to each of those individual components of the Satsampati. Sama, this is inner peace, this is tranquility. Now we've been doing our discrimination between the real and the unreal, and we've been withdrawing ourselves, renouncing the seeking after of pleasure. And we're doing this because we know that it's unreal and not ultimately fulfilling, because we are infinite, that's finite, and we can never be satisfied by the finite. So in this way, we begin to cultivate this sama, this tranquility that is based upon constantly reflecting on the defects or the shortcomings of the finite world. Now this sounds like a lot of negative teaching, but this part is necessary. This is discipline. We need to discipline our minds and not be afraid of it. The next one is Dhamma, and this means control of the senses. We're not going to let them run about anymore. If Sama is this inner control, of the mind, the Dhamma is the sense control. We're not going to let the senses run away with our minds anymore. We're not going to let the senses go after the sense objects. This is also something else that we don't necessarily know about most people in the West, that each sense goes to a particular object. And learning the connection between those two is very, very useful. Anyway, so this is sense control, Dhamma. The next one is Uparati. Now that we have checked the outward going of the senses and we've convinced the mind to stay where it is, this Uparati is a kind of special muscle that keeps us from going out again. So it's withdrawal into the self. The one after that is Titiksha, and it's called forbearance. And this is forbearance of, classically it's put as heat and cold, pleasure and pain. Life in the world, life in a body is full of disagreeable moments, and we must forbear them. And we forbear them by applying knowledge, the things that occur to us, the arisings of karma, the interactions with people, the emotions that arise in us over different circumstances. All of these things are taking place in nature and not in the self, not in the Atma. So this is part of how we cultivate this titiksha so that we can forbear and maintain our mind in equipoise. After this, the way Shankara puts it in the Vivekachudamani, he lists Shraddha next. Now this Shraddha is faith in the Shruti, faith in the teachings of the realized seers as they appear in the Upanishads and other revealed scriptures. And faith also in what our teacher is telling us. When we have this faith, it's a provisional faith. It's different from belief. It's a very dynamic faith. When we have it, and yet we still have not realized these things, this faith gives us the energy and the enthusiasm to pursue the path, because we have to walk it. Our teacher cannot walk it for us. We have to walk it for ourselves. So this Shraddha is very important, and we all know the story of Nachiketas in the Katha Upanishad, how faith, he was infused with faith and went to seek Yama, the Lord of control, the Lord of death, to receive the highest teachings. Yama was very, very impressed. The final one is Samadhana. This is constant concentration of the intellect, the buddhi, on Brahman. And it's not possible to do this unless we have all of these other things in place. Now, we're reaching the end of my time here. And one of the things that I wanted to mention is that this sounds like a lot to be able to practice. And when we look deeply into ourselves and the level of detachment or renunciation that we have, the enthusiasm we have for liberation as opposed to getting caught up in our daily lives, we may find that it's really not up to the level that Shankara is saying that we need it. But by maintaining holy company, this is so important for householders. My great teacher, Sri Ramakrishna, used to say that the householder needs to withdraw for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a month, whatever the householder can do. Withdraw from everything and spend time in holy company and time in contemplation. So if we put ourselves in the presence of our teacher, if we go and find competent teacher or teachers and spend time with them, there's a certain special thing that happens by doing this. it almost automatically cultivates this desire for liberation. Sri Ramakrishna told this very lovely story, and maybe this is all I'll have time for, but that proves this point. And he talked about a young man who wanted to become the apprentice of a great weaver. He was a master weaver. Spectacular weavings came out of his shop, spectacular cloth. And so he presented himself before the master weaver and he said, please, sir, and notice he's approaching the teacher with reverence. This is very important. He approached him with humility and said, may I become your apprentice? And the weaver looked at him and said, well, maybe. And he said, go sit over there and watch for a while. And so the young man took his seat, and he was up against a big table that had all kinds of yarns and threads and whatnot. And he's just watching the weaver doing all these amazing things. And the weaver finally says, the master weaver says, you there, I need a ball of 32 strand thread. And the young man is looking at all these different balls of thread, and he has no idea which one the master weaver is thinking of. So he just hopes for the best, and he reaches out and he starts to grab one. And the weaver says, no, that's a 31. I want the 32, the blue one right next to it. And the young man thinks to himself, oh my, how on earth am I going to learn how to do that? How am I going to know the difference between a 31 strand and a 32 strand? But the master weaver accepted him, and in the course of time, without ever teaching him directly how many strands of thread there was in each different kind of yarn, the young man learned it simply by being in the teacher's presence. So this is the power of holy company. And Shankaracharya, and maybe I'll end with this, he states in that wonderful song, Bhaja Govindam, he says, Satsangatve nisangatvam, nisangatvam nirmohatve, nirmohatve nischalatatvam, nischalatatve jivan mukti. From the company of the good comes non-attachment. From non-attachment comes freedom from delusion. From freedom from delusion comes steadfastness. And from steadfastness comes jivan mukti, liberation in this very life and body. So I want to thank Advaita Academy for allowing me the privilege of sharing what I know, what I've studied with everyone, and just gratitude for all the background staff that has made this celebration of oneness possible. This is an amazing thing. It feels like a groundswell. Maybe it'll happen again next year. Namaste.
Annapurna ji, namaste. Thank you so much for a very profound message, delivered with such lucidity. Throughout this sessions, you have been hearing this word prasanna gambhiryam, and you have demonstrated that. You have delivered some really important points with very calm and very simple words. And this summary of qualifications of a teacher, and a lot of times, I work with a lot of children and a lot of students. They talk about the teacher, but they don't talk about themselves. So you also talked about the 4 qualities of a student, because it is the match. Even if the receiver is perfect, even the giver is the perfect, the receiver also has to have certain qualities. So you have summarized so beautifully. Thank you for that. And definitely for everybody listening, do not try to grow crops in the night. Let's take the full help of the sun during the day, just like we can get help from the Guru. We have several comments and questions. The first one is, how do you know your ideal Guru? Is it just good luck to find a good, competent teacher? um, or how would you know? Because there's so many gurus to choose from.
Yes, but Shankaracharya has given us this list.
Hmm.
And you will, I'm sure it appears in other scriptures. I must admit I'm most familiar with the Vivek with regard to Shankaracharya's works. But it's right there, that list. They must know the scriptures, the essence of the scriptures, and be able to transmit them. They must impart the teachings for no ulterior motive. And as you observe the teacher, does the teacher live according to the teachings that he or she is delivering? And do they speak as one with true authority? You know, I have to admit that how do we judge whether or not somebody is a knower of Brahman? You know, in the case of the super great teachers, it's like obvious. You know, you can't hide the sun shining. A Shankaracharya, a Ramana Maharshi, a Ramakrishna, Vivekananda. I mean, it's just obvious. But it may not be so obvious in other competent teachers because we're not so tuned in yet. So I would say make sure that you cultivate, I'm speaking to whoever had the question, cultivate your sincerity. Be sure that what you want is realization and you truly want to understand the teachings. And this will, if you're true to yourself about this, you will be led to the right teacher.
Yeah, they say that if you know, when the student is ready, the guru will actually arrive, isn't it? In some of the scriptures that I have read, there's also a question about how many people in this world today really are able to qualify themselves to be ready to be a student. I mean, it's very hard because we live in a world with so much distraction. So,
Yes.
any comment on that?
Oh, yes. We talk about this a lot in our Sangha, and this is on the minds of everyone, and especially people who are feeling cautious about really diving into the path, and it's a big problem for householders. But what's the alternative? You know, we are here. We have that reality as our own essence. Do we not want to experience it? And remember, in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, even a little practice of this Dharma will save us from the great fear. So don't worry about trying to eat the whole thing. How do you eat an elephant, right? This is another little joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So start with discrimination, cultivate your sincerity, and read the scriptures, and find a teacher, and take it at your pace, and stretch yourself as you are able, and just walk forward.
Absolutely, because everything in life, starts with number one, the first step. Even if you're trying to scale the Mount Everest, you have to take the first step. You're not going to do it all at once. So same thing with sadhana as well. Extremely well said. You also mentioned that each of the senses are attracted to particular objects. That we should understand that aspect deeper. Is there an example that you can expand on that a little bit?
Yes. So the sense of tasting, okay, goes after flavors, right? And the sense of hearing goes after sounds. And the sense of smelling goes after fragrances, and so on, like that. The sense of touch goes after tangible objects. So there's a practice called dissolving the mind stream. It's a yogic practice, also Vedantic, yes. And in fact, I know I haven't memorized this one, but Sri Shankara has a verse about merging the objects of the senses into the senses, and then the senses into the mind, and then the mind into the intellect into the ego into the self, and then to the great self. So, but it all starts with understanding those five sense objects and how they connect to the senses. And as soon as you do that, as soon as this is a contemplative process, right? Practice. So you're closing your eyes, you're not allowing yourself to be distracted. You're in a room that you practice in your sadhana. And then you begin to think about the objects of the senses and you pair them up with each sense. As soon as you do that, they're not going out, you're going inward. And this is the benefit of the dissolving the mind stream, is that we're going, instead of the senses going outward, we're bringing them in, and we're bringing them in by making this connection. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, no, it was very helpful. Again, it's a sadhana, like we said. It's nothing. It's not like a pill you can take one day and you become suddenly,
Definitely.
we can become very wealthy if you have the Advaita pill. There's also this. We all know that the example of mirage and water, and once we know that water is not there, we won't go for it. So the question is, how do we make this example work in everything in the real world, knowing that what you see is a delusion, so you shouldn't go for it, but you end up going for it. What are some checks and balances we can inculcate?
Well, I would say that first of all, you need to think about this deeply in a contemplative mode. So it won't do to try and apply this on the go, right? By the time you get to work or there's an argument in your family, it's like it's too late. We need to spend time in formal, there we go, that's the word I was looking for, formal spiritual practice, so that we can think deeply about this, so that when the circumstances arise in our daily life, we can remember to detach. So here's one particular method that I like to use. I like to think about the states of awareness, the waking state, the dreaming state, and the deep sleep state. Okay, we all know that there's four, right? Turiya, the fourth, is the last, and that's our Atman. And it is the one self-cognition that is arising in all states of consciousness. But when we're in our waking state, we're engaged with all this external stuff. But when we go to sleep and we're dreaming, we're not thinking about our waking state anymore. It goes away and we have this different reality. And then when we go into the deep sleep state, where mind goes into abeyance, and even our personal gunas go into abeyance, and everything is formless, we don't remember what's going on there. So both the waking and the dream and the experiences of dream, they all dissolve into the deep sleep state. So if they were truly real, why wouldn't they be present all the time? All those experiences. So I realize this is a very philosophical answer, but it's worth spending a lot of time deeply contemplating it. You can also even think about it. There will come a time when your body dies and you pass from this realm. Where will all those things be then? Were they not like a dream? So the only thing that is our own is the Atman. I hope that was helpful.
Yes. The comment from the people, that was a beautiful answer. Thank you so much. And, really wonderfully presented. And I took a lot of notes because, I'm a teacher, so I want to make sure I qualify when I open my mouth the next time. And I'm also a student, so I have to look at my list to make sure that I'm ready to receive that, infinite wisdom of Jagadguru Adi Shankaracharya, which is coming to us through wonderful speakers like you, and who you're all practicing it every single day. And so thank you so much for your time with us. We sincerely appreciate it. We hope to have you again. Now, this festival, our idea is to continue this throughout the year, if not every day like this, but some way, because we don't want to make this an annual event. We want to make this a continuous flow, so that by next year, when we have this big festival, a lot of people are already in that sadhana marga. So thank you once again.
Yes.
We'll
Very
move on
good.
to the next presentation.
Thank you. It was
Namaste.
a great privilege. Namaste.